I know usually on this podcast, I've been having either scientists and researchers or psychic mediums. And today I'm just doing a completely fun episode. Today's guest is Rebecca Williamson. She is owner of the Cambre House and Farm, a haunted wedding venue. She has been interested in the paranormal her entire life and has nearly 20 years of experience doing paranormal investigations. Rebecca bought the Cambre House from her grandparents' estate in 2016 and hosts weddings and paranormal investigations. Welcome to What the Fuck Just Happened? I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listen to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I will be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened? Hi everyone, I have an interesting guest today. Her name is Rebecca Williamson, and she has in her family a haunted house and just some great stories. And go ahead, Rebecca, tell everyone about your story.
Okay. So my grandparents bought this farm in the 70s, and it was a historic home that my grandmother had actually visited when she was a little girl. And when the home went up for auction, she just felt like she had to go see it, wanted to buy it really bad. And my grandfather wasn't too keen on the idea, but he went out there to see it. And when they got there, it was exactly the way she remembered it when she was a little girl. And my grandfather fell in love with it at first sight and said, okay, let's do this. And so they bought the home in 1979 with the intention of preserving the history of the home. They never intended to live there. They just loved history that much that they wanted to buy this home and preserve the history. So they went through the process. They put it on the National Register of Historic Places. They basically cared for and maintained the home up until they passed away. And they did like craft shows. We did family gatherings and things out there. But so it was kind of more like a vacation type home, but it was fun. We loved being out there. I just have so many fun family memories of being out there at the farm. So then after they passed away, I bought it. And we were trying to talk about what we were going to do with it as a family. And they decided to sell it. And they talked to a realtor, and the realtor came out and said, well, this home just has to be totally gutted and remodeled if you were ever going to, somebody's going to live in it. And the idea of that kind of broke my heart. And so I bought it and then said, oh my goodness, now what am I doing with this thing? Because I wasn't planning on moving into it either. It's a historic home that was built in the 1860s. And so everything in the home, for the most part, is original to the 1860s. I mean, my grandparents added running water and there's electricity, but it's the same floor plan. Like even the windows are the original hand-blown glass. It's really more like a museum than a house. So I said, well, over the years, I had some cousins that got married out at the farm. So I thought, well, I'd open it up as a wedding venue. And so that's what I did. I opened it as a wedding venue and then realized it was haunted.
Okay, so you growing up, you never thought of it as haunted. Your grandparents or parents never said it was haunted.
No.
What made you realize it was haunted?
I spent the night there for the first time because when I was growing up and it was dark and time to, go to sleep, we always just went to my grandparents' house. They didn't live that far away. And so we just I never spent the night out there. So like right after I bought it, I went out there to do some work and my sister came with me and my kids and stuff. And we spent that first night and we heard footsteps in the middle of the night that were definitely not one of us. We found that out in the morning, like I thought it was my sister thought it was me, and it was not either one of us. So then we got to thinking like, well, wait a second. There were doors that opened in the house from the time my grandparents bought it, that and the basement door especially opened and closed on its own. And my grandparents had always just told us it was a drafty house, and, old houses, that just happens. But looking at it from a paranormal investigator standpoint, that door shouldn't have opened by itself because it latches solidly. It's not like you can jar it and make it open on its own. I've never been able to get a draft, like opening the front door and back door and stuff to try and get a draft to open it. It doesn't open that way. But that door is opened often enough that all of us knew that door opened on its own. And looking back at that, we were definitely having paranormal activity. It's just we never attribute it to ghosts at that time.
When was the shift? What made you think this is ghosts or discarnate consciousness or whatever you want to call it?
Hearing the footsteps was the big shift. That was just kind of opened my eyes to what had been going on all along. It was like, well, the footsteps were very loud and very distinctive. I definitely heard them, and it was definitely not somebody that was with me. And so then it was like, when you're thinking back, I was like, well, what about that door thing that was going on? That wasn't a draft. That could have been paranormal. So to kind of like reassure my mind, I reached out to a friend who was starting a paranormal team, and they came out and did an investigation. And then that was the point where we knew we had activity for sure. They had a really active investigation, like all the equipment was going off and cold spots like crazy. And I mean, it was like an extremely active investigation that after that point, then we just had no doubts in our mind that we were definitely experiencing activity out there.
Very interesting. And so have other things continued to happen? Have other people reported? What I think so interesting too is that all of you heard the footsteps at the same time.
It was one of those things when it happened, it was like, well, wait, that's not right. I think that was paranormal. That was a ghost.
What else happened next? So you said more stuff kept happening.
So the door, it has continued to open. I mean, I've caught that on camera once. Again, like sitting there and debunking that door opening was really exciting to prove that was a paranormal thing. Trying to make it open by causing a draft, but then, it doesn't. And then when it opens by itself, then it's like, oh, I think that's paranormal.
Is there any consistency to it opening? Is there a certain time of day or just random?
Nope, it's just totally random. I wish it would be like 3:00 every afternoon and then I could really catch it on video, but no, it is totally random. So we've had the front door opens on its own and it locks. My mother gets locked out of the house pretty frequently. She will come over and she'll like rearrange furniture and help me out in that own, mother way, where she comes over and if she doesn't like curtains, then she'll buy ones that she thinks they need. And anyway, she'll come over and she'll change things while I'm gone. And now she can't get into the house because her key won't work on the door.
So wait, front door will open and then someone will step out and suddenly the door will lock, or suddenly people's keys stop working? Like what happens exactly?
Well, to back up, when it first started happening, it was the original lock that my grandparents had put on the door in the 80s. And my mom and my dad and my cousins and my sisters, they all had keys because, it was a family property. And I was okay with that because they were helping me out and stuff. And one day my cousin's key stopped, wouldn't open the door. It wouldn't work in the lock. And then my mother's key quit working and my sister's key quit working. And I just assumed, well, that lock is wearing out. I probably should change it before my key quits working, right? So I changed the lock. And then my mother's key still doesn't work in the lock. And it's a brand new lock and a brand new key. But my mom's key won't work. So we trade keys. Mom comes over again, still can't get it in the house. Her key won't work. My sister's key quit working again. But my key opens the door every time. My key always opens the door.
Wait, your key, no matter who has it or whatever, like your mom's key won't work.
No, like I pass off my keys to my mother and she still can't get in the house.
And then she gives you hers and it works.
Yeah. There was one instance where she was cleaning at the house, doing something, and she went out to the car to get something out of the car and the front door shut behind her and locked.
And does it automatically lock when it closes?
You have to turn the thumb latch to lock it. So no, it shut and locked because she'd been in, she'd actually got in that time, but apparently she did something that really irritated everybody and they locked her out. And then there was one day, well, the last time I asked her to let somebody in for me because I can't always be there. And if somebody needs to go into the house, I used to ask Mom to go over there. And this one day she's like, well, my key doesn't always work and I'm worried about letting them in. She's like, and I said, don't worry, I'll go there in the morning. I'll unlock it. And so it'll be unlocked. And you just are there to make sure they get in. And so I unlocked it at 7:00 in the morning, flipped on some lights, made sure everything was good. I left at 7. She got there at 9 and the door was locked and she couldn't get in. So yeah, no, Mom doesn't get asked to let people in anymore because it just never reliably works for her. On the flip side of that, though, I've come out there and the door's been open. My key always opens the door. But there was one day where I had a construction worker out there and he was doing some work that morning. And I knew I was going to miss him by like a couple hours. So he knew I was coming. I knew he'd been there. And when I got there, the front door was left open. And I had to go to the bathroom really bad that particular day. So I was really excited about just being able to run in the house and not have to mess with keys and everything. And, I sent him a quick text message and I said, hey, I made it. Thanks for leaving the door open for me. The repair work looks great, And he messaged me back right away, pretty upset because he had locked the door and shut it and it shouldn't have been opened. And he was upset that I thought he left it open when he's like, no, I shut that. It's locked. It shouldn't be like that. And so then I had to go through the house and make sure there wasn't anybody there, but there wasn't. It's like they knew I was coming. They knew I had to go to the bathroom. So they opened the door for me.
So they sound like they kind of are kind, like they're taking care of you or maybe mischievous.
A little on the mischievous side. Mm-hmm. There was one day where I had a furnace guy coming out to look at the house and he told me he was going to get there at 1. So I left at noon to go get lunch. And I came back at 12:30 and he was walking out of the house. Like the furnace guy had showed up while I was gone and the house had been unlocked. Even though I'd locked the door, the house was unlocked and he got in and he was finished with the furnace by the time I got there.
So it's good it was unlocked.
Like they knew the furnace guy was there. It was like, oh yeah, come on in,
You said that other things have happened too.
There's a ton of stuff that's happened. So my son actually has the best ghost stories. I love his because he stayed out there for about 6 months after he graduated from high school. And he had wild stuff happen. There was one day where it was snowing and it was like the very first snowfall of the season. It was big, fat, fluffy flakes. And I told him to go outside and take a picture of the house in the snow so I could use it, because I needed pictures. I'm like, take a picture of the house in the snow. So he went outside, walked out to his truck, snapped a quick picture of the house, got something out of his truck. And when he turned around, there was a person standing at the side of the house. And he looked at the person looked at him, and they both got kind of startled. And the person turned and ran around the backside of the house. And, there's a fresh layer of snow on the ground. So my son's like, well, I'll just grab a flashlight because it's dusk, and he goes in, he grabs the flashlight and he's like, I'll just follow the tracks in the snow and make sure they left, because he didn't really want to confront the person, but he wanted to make sure that they'd left the property. And so He came back out with the flashlight. He walked around to the corner of the house, expecting to see footprints, and it was a fresh layer of snow with no prints at all. In fact, the entire backyard was pristine layer of snow, and he was really very startled. And just that whole, he hadn't been like 20 feet away from this person, and he clearly saw them, and then they were gone.
So he saw them run, watched the whole thing. It wasn't snowing at that moment where a fresh layer would be covering footsteps. There was just snow on the ground, and he watched them run. And then there was no sign, no footprints.
I mean, it was a fresh layer of snow. It was snowing, but there was like about 1.5 inches of snow on the ground. So there would have been footprints. If there was a person there, there would have been prints. He would have been able to follow the prints in the snow, but nothing, absolutely nothing.
Was he scared? Did he think it was fun? Like, I would find this so cool. I mean, I wouldn't say I would know what was going on, but I would be like, I would love if stuff like that would happen to me, which it never does.
He called me, and I could always tell by the tone in his voice when he called, because I get this, Mom, and he would be like, oh, Mom, he calls and he tells me what's happened. And I mean, he was always a little startled, but he stayed out there. I mean, it didn't scare him away from staying at the house.
Have any of your friends seen stuff? It sounds like your whole family has.
Yeah, I mean, they've all had their own experience out there with either like they've come out to do an investigation with me or just had their own experience. Like I said, mom is always calling me, telling something that happened to her, it seems like. And my cousins, a lot of my cousins have come out for ghost tours. My grandfather seems to be pretty active in the house. So when we're doing a ghost tour, we've gotten some responses from my grandfather, which is really exciting for us to have that kind of communication with him, and been able to ask him if he enjoys what I'm doing out there at the farm, if he likes that, and we've gotten confirmation that he does. And
how do you know it's your grandfather? What makes you think that's him?
Well, just asking. I mean, we've got usually dowsing rods asking yes no questions. Who was here? Is it male? Is it female? Yes, it's male. And then asking if it's my grandfather, and then getting the confirmation that yes, it is.
Can you describe the dowsing rods and what you mean, how that would work? Because I don't know if all our listeners know what that means.
Okay, yeah. So dowsing rods are actually used to find water. It's 2 copper wires bent into an L shape, and you hold them kind of loosely in your hands. When they're using them to find water, they'll walk across, an area where they're looking for it. And when it crosses, then you've found water, and still used today. So when you're using them for like an investigation, you hold them loosely, sitting down, sitting still, standing still, and then ask the question, and usually yes, no, and cross for yes and cross for no, or vice versa, starting in advance and saying, can you cross for yes? And they'll cross and then uncross. So it's kind of useful to get like that yes, no questions answered pretty readily.
The man that your son saw, it's not anyone he'd recognize or no one who looks like they'd be in your family?
No. Actually, we think that is probably a Native American. I mean, he was close enough, but he didn't really get a good look. It was at dusk. But we kind of think that's Native American. I've got a lot of Native American activity out in the yard. There are 2, possibly 3 Native American burial mounds on my property that in the 1820s, all the bones and artifacts were taken out and sold. I had the local Native American Council. I've worked with them a little bit, and they came out and they verified that what I have are desecrated Indian mounds. They were kind enough to do a blessing ceremony for me out there. So, kind of trying to pay my respects there a little bit. But the yard itself outside, like I said, my son saw that ghost. And then we've seen some shadow figures walking around in the yard. And then there's a feeling of just like watchfulness while you're outside, especially after dark. It just feels like you're being watched. Not in a mean way. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe, but not like more like a protective way. I had a guy who was mowing my yard, and he had stopped he got a phone call. He stopped mowing, sat down at the table by the house and took out his wallet and forgot his wallet. And so after dark, he'd realized that he'd forgotten his wallet, and he comes out there to go get the wallet. And he said it was the most uncomfortable feeling ever. And he said he will never, ever do that again. He's like, it could wait till morning. He's like, that's not going to happen again.
He felt like there were beings around him, or is it like physically hurt?
He said it just felt like people were watching him. He just felt very watched. He felt like he shouldn't be out there. He said it was just a very uncomfortable watched feeling that he had. And he's not a believer in ghosts. So, which was kind of funny that, here's my lawn mowing guy. I mean, he's a pretty big guy and not really afraid of mud. He's not going to go out there and get after dark. He told me flat out, that's not going to happen. I was totally fine with him going to get his wallet after dark. I mean, it wasn't that big a deal, but the idea that it scared him that much just kind of cracked me up.
Do you know the history of the house at all before your grandparents got it?
Oh, yeah, sure. So part of what my grandparents did to put it on the National Register was going through and getting the history of the home. So it was built in 1867 by French Icarians Adolphe and Hortense Cambre. The Icarians were a movement birthed out of the French Revolution where they came over to have a communal society. They came to Nauvoo and then were with this communal society. It was like a hippie commune where you sold everything you owned and you lived together and worked together in one communal society. They left the Icarians and bought my property in 1860 and built a one-room cabin there while they were building the big 6-room home that stands there today. And the Cambre family owned my property until 1979. So there were 4 generations of Cambres that lived out on the home. And then, like I said, in 1979, my grandparents bought it at auction. So it was a working apple orchard from the 1850s until around the 1940s. Apple trees have a lifespan of around 100 years. So that was around the lifespan of the apple trees. And yeah, it was a happy home. It was just their home. Adolphe and Hortense had 10 kids. And out of 10 kids, 2 died in childhood. So Eglantine Cambre died at the age of 9 on the property, and she's buried out there in a grave, an unmarked grave. The family knew where it was, but they didn't have a marker out there. After Adolphe and Hortense passed away, 2 of their children, Fritz and Anita, took over running the farm. Fritz and Anita never married, and they never had any children, but they lived basically their whole lives on the farm. And then after Fritz and Anita passed away, their nephew, Robert, took over running the farm. And that's who my grandparents bought the property from.
Do you think any of the ghosts could possibly be the original, anyone from that huge family?
We actually have some pretty good theories. We really think Eglantine Cambre is our most active spirit out there. Again, confirmed through doing investigations, multiple investigations. Eglantine is usually pretty chatty when we get out equipment. So like I said, she died at the age of 9. She actually died before they completed work on the house. But like when we're doing investigations, she just says that this is her home and she was happy. She liked being there with her family and she didn't want to leave. Like I said, Eglantine's are most active. The son, Fritz, who took over running the farm, he's usually semi-active. He's the one I think is locking the doors. I have some letters that he'd written talking about how he liked having the farm run. Robert had taken over a little bit before Fritz passed away. So there's letters that Fritz wrote complaining about the way Robert was taking care of things. So, and Fritz's bedroom upstairs is the one that usually seems to be the most active, one of the more active rooms. So there's Fritz. And then, a few of the other Cambres pop in every now and again. But Eglantine seems to be our most active one.
You said you found this out through paranormal investigation team.
Yeah.
I think you said this team are your friends. I'm so curious how you found them and a little bit about the teams and what an investigation is like.
I went to high school with a Chad Derry, who started a paranormal team called Augusta Paranormal, based out of Augusta, Illinois. And so, yeah, they were starting their team right around the time that I'd bought the home. So they came out and did investigations. And so what that entails is like they bring all their equipment out, A2, EMF detectors, temperature gauges, thermal imaging cameras, basically what you see on Ghost Hunters or the TV shows. There's a lot of teams around Iowa, Illinois and stuff that, go look for ghosts. And there's all kinds of different equipment too. Those are kind of like the highlight. And dowsing rods, like I said, yes, no questions are kind of fun with the dowsing rods, like I explained before. There's ITC devices, spirit box. It kind of skips through radio stations really quickly. And the theory is that spirits are energy and electricity, and they're able to manipulate that energy and electricity of the radio frequencies to then put out a voice. So scanning through radio stations very fast, and then you'll hear voices, words, snippets of songs or whatever. So a lot of times you'll get a bunch of garbage, junk, static, but occasionally you will get like responses that are
actually recorded.
Like you ask a question.
That is called, if anyone knows, wants to know, electronic voice phenomena. And have you studied that, or this just all started to happen?
Yeah, I have studied it a little bit. I've been interested in the paranormal for a long time, but obviously I got into it a lot more after I started doing investigations at the house. Yeah. EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. Typically, you can just set out an audio recorder and ask questions and pause, and then see when you play back that tape in the pause where nothing was going on. Like sometimes you will hear a voice or a sentence and stuff. And then sometimes you'll hear, when you hear an audio response, like actually hear it with your ears, that's called a disembodied voice. ITC, like I said, that's a spirit box communication. It's a little bit different than the EVP.
For recording, you can just use your phone. You don't need to buy any special recorders, do you?
No, you do not need to buy any special recorders.
What's the difference between, I actually didn't know there was a difference. What's the difference between EVP and ITC?
The EVP, you don't have to, it just happens. It just, you don't have to do anything special. You just hit record on any voice recorder, even your phone, and then play it back, and you'll hear the voice. So you won't hear it when it happens, but you'll hear it on the playback. The spirit box, the ITC device, it's spitting out static words, things. You'll hear that in real time. So yes, it'll be on your recorder too, but you will hear that in real time. So it's more like the manipulation of the actual sound from the staticky device.
Have you ever looked up, and this is also a great resource for anyone listening, Sonia Rinaldi? She specializes in ITC, I believe, or EVP. I had realized there was a difference until the second. And she specializes like helping people with grief connect with using ITC, EVPs.
ITC is, I think, revolutionary for the ghost thing, because doing an investigation where you're hearing the response in real time is amazing. I mean, to sit down and do an investigation with like just a plain recorder and then play this responses back and listen for them. I mean, that's one thing, and you're getting the response, but it's not like you can have a conversation. The ITC, you can have like an actual conversation. Like talking to you, you ask a question, I give a response, and then you ask another question based off of my response.
And you hear it in live time with ITC.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you had that happen yet? Has it worked?
Yeah.
Let's hear about it. Oh my, wow. We tell the story.
It's a lot of fun to do an investigation with ITC. This one was Facebook Live. We were doing this one Facebook Live. So this was, I had Traveler's Moon out. Doing an investigation. So you'll see it on, if you want to, look through their Facebook Lives, that's where this recording is. So we're sitting there, and she's got the Facebook Live with the chat, and her partner, the other part of Traveler's Moon, headphones on. So he's listening to the ITC device with headphones on and then speaking what he hears. He can't hear the questions that we're asking. He can only hear the responses. So doing that is called the Estes method. It kind of gives you like a double blind, because when you're listening to static, you can hear what you want to hear sometimes. And so by doing it that way, it kind of removes a little bit of the hearing what you expect to hear. So anyway, he's one of our friends popped into the Facebook chat, and it was Chad Derry, who is actually part of Guest of Paranormal, who's been out there to do a lot of investigations. So Kelly, my friend who's watching the chat and the Facebook Live, says, "Oh, Chad's here. Hi, Chad." And the person who was listening to the ITC says, "Derry." And we're like, "Ah." And he's just kind of sitting there going, he's thinking cows. He's thinking we're talking about cows at this point. And then he says Chad. And that's when it clicks into him that we're talking about Chad Derry. And
wait, on the ITC box, he heard Derry, then Chad Derry. Did you hear this? Or there was a person who was doing the ITC box who said, "I'm hearing Chad on this. I'm hearing Derry." Yeah. It was somebody else. Okay.
Yeah. He's listening to the ITC with headphones on. So he's the only one who can hear it, but he can't hear the questions or anything else that's going on in the room around him.
And remind me, what was the question?
At this point, there really wasn't a question. We were just kind of chatting, talking on the Facebook Live. We're at Cambre House doing an investigation, blah, blah, blah. And then people are popping up in the chat room and she's saying, "Oh, hi, I see you." That kind of thing was going on. And like I said, he just randomly said Derry right as Chad came into the chat room, and then said Chad afterwards. So
did he see Chad come in, or was it he didn't even see him? No, you're shaking your head no.
Can't see any of the Facebook Live or anything. We're videoing him for the Facebook Live. So he couldn't see any of that. He had no clue any of that was going on. Obviously, he knew he was being videotaped, but yeah, the coincidence of Chad coming into the chat room just as he said that one was really good. There was another one where this one is kind of weird, because we start our ghost tours. When I do a ghost tour at the farm, we start out in the barn and I give them like some history of the location and then, hot spots and that sort of stuff. So this particular night, the guest comes in for the ghost tour and he goes to sit down on the bench in the barn and his wedding ring falls off. And I'm panicking, thinking he's going to lose the ring in the barn, but it wasn't a big deal. He picks it up, he puts it back on. The entire interaction was like 30 seconds. The only comment was, "Woo, glad you found that," And so then later on, he goes into the house and he's doing the investigation. And he'd been downstairs and the rest of the group was upstairs. And again, they're doing the Estes method for the ITC. And just as he walks upstairs to rejoin the rest of the group, ring is called out from the ITC. And the entire group who'd witnessed him lose his ring was just blown away. They're like, "Oh my gosh." And the paranormal team, who hadn't seen any of that happen, was like, "What?" They didn't understand the significance of it because they'd been in the house waiting.
And they're hearing ring on the ITC as this man's ring falls off or shortly after. So they're in one room hearing ring on this ITC. This other man outside, his ring is falling off. And they're kind of like, well, why are we hearing ring? So that's what was going on?
Kind of. So the ring had fallen off like about a half hour before, but the man whose ring had fallen off had just walked upstairs. So he had just walked up to the top of the stairs when it says ring. And like I said, the entire tour group knew exactly what it was referencing. And the paranormal team was like, "Why are you so excited? I don't understand," because they hadn't been out in the barn and they didn't see any of that interaction. And it was so insignificant that nobody had thought to mention it to the team. It wasn't like a big deal. But to get that over the ITC at that point was just really exciting.
That's such a fun story.
It is. It is. And the idea that the ghost in the barn had seen that. And then I don't know if they came with him into the house or if they just told the ghost in the house. I don't know. It's fun to speculate. How did that information go from here to there?
Do you participate in other investigations, or you just have them at your house? Do you consider yourself an investigator?
I kind of consider myself kind of an investigator. I don't really have a team, but I'm friends with a lot of teams at this point. And when they're going on an investigation, I get invited along. I've been to Waverly Hills and Missouri State Penitentiary and several in Iowa and around. I get invited sometimes. So that's fun for me to get out and see other haunted locations and just relax and investigate and not be in charge of an event or in charge of the location. It's more fun to go and relax every now and again.
And what were your beliefs about all of this before you got the house? Did you think ghosts were real and afterlife was real?
I definitely believed in ghosts. I've always loved ghost stories. Ghost stories I've loved those since I was a little kid. I just always checked out books in the library when, my grade school library even had a few little ghost books, and I checked them all out and read all of them. And I loved the stories. And for one of my birthdays, I had a girlfriend that bought tickets for me to go on a ghost tour. So we'd gone out on this big ghost tour for my birthday, and it was so much fun and I loved it. And people are always like, well, did you buy the house knowing it was haunted? And I was like, well, I didn't really think about this house being haunted. It was something that had been in my family forever. And, when you grow up with something, you don't necessarily think about it like that. Yeah, that's kind of I definitely afterwards. Like I said, when we got that footsteps the first time, that was when kind of like, oh, wait a second.
And nothing weird happened there when you were a kid, though.
Definitely the door situation. Like I said, that door had opened often enough that when we were having a big event, they would put one of us grandkids there by that door to make sure it would stay shut. And that's how often that basement door opened.
That was always, I thought that was more recently only.
No, that's happened since the day my grandparents bought the house. Always happened. There's a few other things, but it's kind of like, I don't know if that was paranormal or not type thing. My sister remembers, she's a little bit younger than I am. So I was in school a lot when they were doing some work out of the house, but my sister was there by herself. But she said there was always a kid to play with when she was out there. There was always a kid to play with. And she's right. Like every time we were out there were always kids to play with. Was it a ghost or was it a kid? I mean, I don't know. That one, I'm not entirely sure if that was paranormal or not, but it might have been. I know that there would have been times that we were out there and there weren't other kids. I know for sure. But at the same point in time, I never remember going out there not having some other kid to play with. So, yeah, like I said, I don't know that that's paranormal or not, but maybe. Like the more you think about it, the more I'm like, well, maybe I was playing with eglantine Cambre as a kid and just didn't think anything of it.
There's a cool story along those lines do you know Lloyd Arbach and his work? No,
I don't think so.
You should look him up. He's like a well-known, really amazing parapsychologist. I've taken classes with him. I've had him on this podcast, and he told a really cool story. And I mean, he's like a hardcore investigator. He's a stage magician, so he really knows how to find every trick. And he's worked with a lot of, the scientifically researched mediums and the scientists. And I forget all the details of who, but it's basically there was a little kid, and they kept playing with this one little kid who was in the yard of this house, or maybe it was their neighbor. I forget exactly. And they mentioned something and to their parents or something. And the parents were like, what? There's no kid with that like that around here. And they get the name of the kid. And it
Uh-huh.
turns out in the house across the street, and I might have a few of the facts wrong, is an elderly woman on hospice in a coma, I believe, or in between. And they
Oh,
see photos of her as a little kid, and it was that kid.
oh,
So
that's
she's,
neat.
yeah, she's
Yeah.
unconscious. And it's very interesting when does our consciousness leave our body? She was being kept
Yeah.
alive on life support.
It is very cool. And like you said, when you're kids, I think your mind's a little bit more open to that sort of thing. And like I said, I know that every time we were out there, there was always a kid to play with. I mean, we always had somebody to play with out in the yard, and but like knowing my mom and my grandma and stuff, we were out there with just them. So I don't know. Again, I don't know if that was paranormal. I don't know for sure. For sure. We never attributed it at the time to being paranormal. Let's put it that way. But now looking back on it, I wonder.
Can't hurt to sometimes be very evidence-based and sometimes just have fun with these stories and talk about them.
It is. It is fun. It is fun. And one of my favorites from one of my son was out there. We had a live stream set up where they put a static camera upstairs and they were going to just live stream all night long. People could watch the house. So no investigation going on. It's just, they're just going to watch, like, okay, whatever. And, people do that. We're going to watch and see if there's something that happens. So my son knew this was going to happen, and I warned him in advance. I told him what time. And so anyway, when the live stream starts, I pop on to make sure that everything's working okay. And as I'm watching the live stream, we all hear footsteps. And I've got like people in the chat going, is there somebody in the house? I hear somebody walking around. And so I sent my son a text message like, did you forget about the live stream? It's going on right now. Why are you walking around? And the poor kid, he, not only was he not walking around, he was sitting on the couch with headphones on watching a movie because he knew the live stream was starting. So he was trying to be quiet. And so, yeah, he put on headphones and was watching a movie. And so he took off the headphones and he too could hear the footsteps walking around upstairs. And he's like, this is why I watch movies with headphones on, so I don't have to listen to any of this.
Could people hear it on the live stream?
Yeah, I was an hour away. So I wasn't anywhere close to, I'm watching the live stream, the whole chat room, we're all hearing the footsteps walking around. And, of course, they're like, well, who's in the house? Who's in the house? And that's what made me think that maybe my son was walking around. And so I thought maybe he'd forgotten what time it was or something like that. But no, he had remembered and he was not walking around. And the other interesting thing is we were hearing boot steps and he was sitting in his stocking feet and he'd taken off his shoes hours before that. And so he wasn't even anywhere. But then when he takes off the headphones and he too could hear like somebody walking around upstairs and knowing that he was alone in the house, that was just really cool. Really cool that we were hearing it and he was hearing it, but not there.
Have you ever had psychic mediums come out to the house or energy intuitives? And if so, what did they have to say?
Yeah, we've had a few of them. Usually they'll pick up on eglantine right away. We had one that she came through and she says, yes, there's a little girl here. And then she also said that there was a little boy. And I said, well, yes, I've got documentation on the little girl. I've got all kinds of information about her. So she's telling us about the little girl. She says, well, she's a twin. And I'm like, yes. And she's like, and the boy's a twin. And I said, I don't know anything about a boy, but the little girl's a twin. And she's like, well, the boy died at the age of 9. And I said, well, the girl died at the age of 9. I said, you're right there. Anyway, it goes on like this for quite a while where she's just really positive there's a little boy. And she's giving me all the information about the little girl. And I'm like, well, it's a girl. And she's like, no, it's a boy. And she's come out there several times. And every time she picks up on a girl and a boy. So we had this kind of like a little bit of argument going on because I got documentation on this of the girl. And anyway, about a year and a half later, when I'm like going through my Cambre family genealogy, I finally found the little boy she was talking about. And he as well died at the age of 9. He was also a twin like Eglantine. He died around 1900. She died in 1864. And what took me so long to find him is he is the grandson of the Cambres, and he would have lived on the farm down the road, but he didn't actually live on the property. And so he definitely would have spent a lot of time out there. Like I said, his parents lived just down the road. So he would have spent time out there. I kind of was able to finally confirm that she was picking up on a little girl and a little boy. The little boy's name is Lewis. He's not as active or as vocal as Eglantine, but several of the mediums have picked up on him in the house.
I guess there's three different thoughts. So I'll ask you first this one.
Okay.
Like sometimes they think it's your own mind. Psychokinesis, PK, like mind's ability to affect matter, the way people can bend spoons. And if anyone's listened to other podcasts, I know some people will say bending spoons is a magic trick. It is, but it's also real because I did it and I witnessed it. So to what extent do you think it's discarnate consciousness, ghosts, versus maybe some of it is coming from you guys unintentionally, psychokinesis?
I mean, like sometimes, especially when we're investigating, there are times when you're like, okay, to me, the ITC device is one of those things. It is just so staticky. And I personally can't listen to it for long periods of time because it just, and like that pareidolia thing or paraecholia or whatever you want to call it, you know, your mind hears what you want it to hear, which is why I like to do the ITC method or the Estes method where one person is listening. And so they don't have that pre-bias of knowing the question and listening for the answer they want to hear. Like I said, I know there's some of that goes on. And then like, sometimes there's stuff that will happen that like the wind, there's walnuts out there. I have like these huge walnut trees. So the wind blows and a walnut falls and hits the roof and people get all excited thinking that, oh my gosh, it's a ghost. And it's like, no, that's a walnut, you know, and sometimes you want something to happen so bad that you give a normal activity a paranormal spin, assuming that a walnut is a ghost. But then there's other times that like the footsteps and the doors and stuff, it's really annoying to have my mom get locked out of the house. I can tell you that. It is very annoying, especially like when I need her there to unlock the house and she can't. And, you know, I make light of it. It's actually kind of humorous, but it's also extremely annoying when I've got a group that's come out there to see the house. They're expecting to get in and now they can't because my mom's key won't open the door.
And just what are your thoughts on this? Hauntings versus apparitions. And this is a thing Lloyd Auerbach wonders, and I'll just explain it for listeners. One is where it's an imprint, like a recording. It's still paranormal. It's still inexplicable, but there's like an imprint of the person who lived there at that time. And it's like watching a video. Their actor, actress might not still be alive, but it's like a recording. And the other is a consciousness where the consciousness survives bodily death and the consciousness of the past one is actually there to engage with. And do you have a thought on which this tends to be at your location?
So the first I would describe is residual, a residual haunting. So the way I try to explain it to people is, you know, we're energy and electricity, and the more that we are living in a location, the more energy that we are expending in that location. And so like wood and stone and stuff can hold on to that energy that we are expending. You know, you think about, you know, like running up and down the stairs, all that energy is left in the stairs. And so to think about a house that's over 150 years old with like 10 kids that lived in it or something like that, it seems almost natural to think that you are going to still hear the footsteps, the echoes go up and down the stairs. And so, yes, I think that we definitely have some residual energy out there, that type of stuff. The intelligent haunting, like the spirits, you know, that intelligent left behind. To me, like when I'm describing that to people, I usually say, you know, it's what you typically think of when you think of a ghost, you know, asking questions, getting the responses. When I talk about Eglantine or Fritz Cambre locking people out of the house or something like that, or unlocking the door, that is the intelligent response. They tell us like during the investigations and stuff that this is just their home and they're happy here and they just chose not to leave. And again, I think part of those the answers to those questions are why we do investigations, is to try and figure out why they're there. What are we experiencing in this paranormal phenomena? You know, is it the residual energy? Is it the intelligent hunting? You know, like what is causing this? And sometimes it is a natural explanation of a walnut falling and hitting the roof. You think might be paranormal, but in fact is totally explainable. And then the other times are the why we go ghost hunting, trying to find it and catch it on tape, because it's fun to be able to tell the story, but it's another to be able to show you that it actually happened and show you that it was paranormal. It's fun.
What is the biggest, you would say, like biggest what the fuck that you've ever encountered?
So last fall, this one was more of a what the fuck, you know, just like what the heck. So last fall, you know, I do my last investigation of the year and I'm like doing another walkthrough. And during the slow seasons, I try to go through like closets and cabinets and organize. So the upstairs attic, I had on my list to go through and organize. So the end of the year, I'm walking through the house after the last investigation and the attic door will not open. It feels like something's fallen against that door and I can't get in there. There's no window to get in that room. So I'm like shoving the door. I can't get it open. This goes on all winter long, months and months. I cannot get into this closet. And like I go out there a few times a month and kind of do a walkthrough and check on things. And so every time I'm there, I'm trying to get the door open and it will not open. And I am so upset and frustrated because that was my plan. It was my winter project, just to organize this closet and I can't get in there. And right before the first investigation this spring, it finally popped open and it was a walnut. Somehow half of a walnut shell had gotten wedged under the door and that was what was holding it shut. And I was like, what the heck? How does this happen? How does it get wedged that solidly under the door that months, like 3-4 months of me wiggling the door does not knock that loose? How does it happen right after the last investigation and open right before the next investigation?
And had you been peeling walnuts in there or anything?
I have no idea why there was a walnut shell in there. I don't know. I really don't. Maybe a mouse? I don't know. But how is a mouse going to wedge that? I don't know. I don't know.
Oh.
Is that paranormal? Is it not? I don't know. But it was how.
All these have been such fun stories. I feel like this is one of the most fun conversations I've had. I feel like I'm like 10 years. So how can everyone find you if someone wants to do a tour or find your website?
I'm pretty much Cambre everywhere you go. So CAMBRE, CambreHouse.com. I'm Cambre _house on Instagram, Cambre House on Facebook, and Cambre House on TikTok. So pretty much at this point, if you type Cambre into a search engine, I should come up somehow or another. I always love telling ghost stories.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, What the Fuck Just Happened? A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. And you can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife. You can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can also read about how much I harassed them trying to get evidence, see if they were cheating, and see if they were sane. There, you can subscribe to our newsletter. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hi, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_ or email me at hello@wtfjusthappened.net. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?